when Alistair Wilson was shot on his front doorstep in a seaside town in the Highlands of Scotland, it would set off a mystery that gripped Scotland for decades.
There was no motive, no suspect, just a confusing envelope with the name Paul on it.
What happened to Alistair?
And why have the police not made any clear progress in 20 years?
We're doing a full recap of Doorstep Murder on this episode of So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
Do you know what the most frustrating thing ever is? It's when my computer doesn't work. I don't know about you, Jeff. Have you experienced this recently?
Yeah, let me tell you about it. First of all, we've all been there. Your computer says it wants to install updates, and it's
at the most inopportune time.
Yeah. And what can you, it's like there's nothing else to do. So you grab your phone, you go to patreon.com/so-much-crime, so little time. And as you watch that little thing on the screen just go around in circles and say, you're 100% there, but you're really not. It's just going to cycle back and do it again. And then it's going to do it again. And it's just going to keep doing that. But you don't mind because you're listening to outtakes from this show. You're listening to the bonus content. You get those episodes that come out early. So you'll update and restart your computer all day just to listen to more great content on Patreon.
And you know what it'll also do, I think, Jeff? It's going to reframe your frustration at your computer or your Wi-Fi or whatever. And it's going to make you have a fuzzy feel-good feeling because you're supporting a tiny show.
Tiny show that would have started recording this very episode about 40 minutes ago.
Tell me about it. 7
But
beers in by this stage.
Oh, geez. So patreon.com/so-much-crime, so little time. Thank you.
It's going to be a wild episode. All right. Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Dee.
And I don't know who I am.
I don't even know who I am anymore.
And I'm Jeff. And before we start, just a quick warning.
Warning.
This episode is going to have spoilers for Doorstep Murder. We will discuss the whole series.
If you haven't listened yet, check out our preview episode on the show. It's the one before this one in your feed.
And we'll also put a link to Doorstep Murder in our show notes.
Before we jump into our discussion today, we want to just remind you about the kind of main focus of this podcast and also some things we learned and we felt about episode 1 before we jump into our recap of the rest of it. So this podcast came out in 2018. Its host is Fiona Walker. There are 8 episodes in total, and it's only 20 to 25 minutes long per episode. So not a big investment here. It is from BBC Radio Scotland in conjunction with BBC Sounds. So it's something we're familiar with. We've covered a couple of these previously. But what is the actual story that's happening? Jeff, can you give us a quick overview?
In the first episode, in our preview episode, we talked about the murder at the center of the story. This was about a guy named Alistair Wilson. He lived in Nairn, Scotland, which is a seaside town on the northwest coast of Scotland. One night, he was putting his kids to bed. He had a 2- and 4-year-old boy. Guy came to the door. His wife answered, somebody she didn't know, and he handed him an envelope. He asked for Alistair Wilson, handed him an envelope. The envelope said Paul on it. Alistair came back inside, was really confused, ended up going back to the door. When he went back to the door, this stranger shot him twice in the head, once in the chest. He ended up dying from those wounds. So we heard about that. And then we also heard a little bit just about Veronica and Alistair's, like their relationship, how they got together. And then we started to hear a little bit about the investigation, which when this podcast was first being put together, it had been over 13 years. And while the cops were very actively working on it, they didn't have a motive or suspect. And yeah, it was just a lot of questions. So that's where we ended in our preview episode. Now we've listened to the whole show, which, just to clarify, was 8 total episodes, but originally was 6 episodes. And then there were 2 follow-ups that came out, although they're just numbered episodes 7 and 8. It's not really clear from looking at it. The last one came out in 2022. So 4 years after the original series came out was episode 8. So yeah, let's jump in and start discussing this. Dee, what are your thoughts on Doorstep Murder?
Shockingly, I have so many thoughts and opinions. I've Where will we start? I discussed in the preview episodes how I was kind of intrigued by this whole, like, as I reference, like this Sex and the City vibe, like episode 1 vibe of like talking to us as if like she's directly speaking to you or me, and then pulling back at doing interviews, and how I found it quite engaging.
Yeah, did that continue?
I'm gonna pull a Jeff here. I'm not sure.
Well, it did
like
continue.
it.
She kept
sorry,
doing it.
Yeah. No, I am sure about that. It did continue, but I don't know if I liked it. I feel like I didn't like it. I started to not like it, and I can't articulate what the reason is. Part of me was like, does this age the podcast? Because it's using this kind of talk to us interview. Does it feel very like 90s or something? I don't know. I'm not sure about that one. So that's one of the thoughts that came to my head. And then the other thought that came to my head is like, do I feel a little bit patronized by some of the times she does that?
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily know. As I said, like, I'm not quite sure if I can articulate what I'm feeling with this. The other thing I was wondering is, does it feel this is going to sound so weird. Does it feel kind of intrusive? Like, I'm like, hey, stop talking to me. Like, I'm just a passive listener to this podcast. I don't want you to be directing something that feels like it's directly to me, which is totally the opposite of what I said in our preview, because I quite enjoyed that. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm kind of hot and cold on it. There were parts of it that I liked. I thought it added some levity, and there were times where I thought levity was misplaced. And
interesting. Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah. So one of the ones I remembered was, I think it was episode 4. Episode 4. Episode 4 is called The Gun, and this is where we hear about the gun that was used in the crime, which was this antique gun that was made in like the 20s or 30s.
A Heisler.
Hanel Schmeisser.
Schmeisser. I was looking this up.
Fiona Walker, our host, goes and tries to see just how easy it would be if you were to try to get this gun right now. And so she goes on the internet, she goes on eBay, and she observes that, so handguns are illegal in Scotland, and they've been illegal since there was a school shooting in, I think, 1996 or 97.
Well done, Scotland.
Sure. Yes. But but she knows that she can get it in America. And speaking as an American, I get it. We have a lot of guns here. Guns are really easy to get here. I don't love it. It is true. She's not wrong. But I felt like she kept kind of coming back to that point of, like, she said it a few times. Like, America.
She did say it a few too many times. I was like, of course, they all have guns over there. And like, as someone who has spent most of their life not in America, it's kind of the vibe.
What do you mean it's kind of the vibe?
It's the vibe that you get when you're not here. You're like, yeah, they're mad for guns over there.
Oh, it's not like you're over here and just everyone is like, has like a sidearm. Like, it's not like the Old West or something.
I know it's not, but I'm saying like it's not far off what most people think. Like, and I think the other thing is, like, just to come back to this, the other thing is what I think you're not realizing is like, there's like a weird fascination. Like, I enjoyed actually hearing Fiona Walker's like opinion of like, this is weird even seeing a gun. This is weird picking up a gun. Like, this situation is weird for me because it's a weird fascination. Like, we don't see them. We don't have them. So it's bonkers.
I know. And like I said, I get it. I've lived in America my whole life, and I've spent 99.9% of my life in America.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it would be weird to see this gun. I have not spent a lot of time around. I've spent a non-zero amount of time around guns, but a close to zero amount of time around guns.
Yeah, that's fair.
Did I say that confusingly enough? I think I tried to say it as confusing as I could.
That is fair, but like I kind of probably empathized with her point there a little bit more because I've seen it. Like I've been there, like I've been in Ireland looking in, and it seems like a real shit show. Like somewhere like Scotland or somewhere like Australia, they have a mass shooting, and what they do is they fucking deal with it. Sorry. But here, it's like, seems like the problem is we need more guns. It feels like a dogman move. Like, it's not the move. So I can understand the coming back to that. And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. We were talking about kind of her little breaking the fourth wall thing. And I think that, to me, that jumped out. I totally understand where she's coming from, and I get it. I just, like, that was a time where I felt like, it's a little overboard, and it's a little too sort of jokey in a way for a story that is very serious.
Yes.
I do I actually really liked her as a host overall. I thought she brought some personality.
Can you actually buy a gun on eBay also?
What a great question. I don't know. Well, it's not a normal gun. It's an antique gun, which I feel like is in a different class of guns. And I wanted to talk about that while we're on this topic. It seems so bizarre to me that this is a gun that is well, I guess at the time it wasn't quite 100 years old, but now it's probably about 100 years old, is like this pocket pistol, like a tiny little gun. And like how, and maybe this is something I don't understand about Europe, where these guns that were used and commonplace during World War II are just kind of like people have them in their attic, people have like, they're just around in a different way than exists over here.
Yeah,
I feel like in the United States.
I feel like it makes sense that they're like in a house and I don't know, someone dies and then someone finds it and someone keeps it, and maybe that's why like they can get away with like killing someone with it, and there being no trace because there is no trace of the gun. There's no history of the gun like as such.
Right. One thing I wanted to note was in the first episode, something that confused me was she described how Alistair gets shot gangland style, as she puts it, twice. She gets shot twice in the head, once in the chest. But just from a sort of I don't know, violent standpoint, or like that seems like he would be immediately killed by that. And I didn't understand at first how it's possible to get shot twice in the head and still have like he wasn't pronounced dead until like a while later at the hospital. And then we learned that this is a very small gun with very small bullets. And she doesn't get into like what caliber bullets they were. Like she talks a little bit about the bullets, but she doesn't really get it like in a way that I almost think an American podcast would focus a lot more on, just with more of a fixation on guns. But the thing that it made me think of, and this is maybe my own ignorance of guns, was, have you seen Back to the Future?
Yes.
Have you seen Back to the Future Part 3?
Back to the Future so many times. Okay. Back to the Future Part 3 is the Wild West one.
The Wild West one, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I have.
Do you remember the very small gun in that movie?
Oh, I forgot about the very small gun in that movie.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen Back to the Future 3, there is a very somewhat pivotal scene. I don't feel like this is a spoiler for a movie that came out 35 years ago and is also part 3 in a series, whatever. Anyway.
I need to rewatch those movies.
Great movies. Where they know, because they're time travelers, when they think Doc Brown, Christopher Lloyd, is going to die. And so Marty McFly goes back in time to save him from dying, getting shot by Biff, or Biff's ancestor, whoever he is.
Some version of Biff. Biff
right.
V1.
And there's a scene where they're at like some type of like party. I think it's like the celebration of the clock tower being installed, and they have to turn in their guns. But the Biff character has this tiny little pocket gun, like this gun, and Marty and Doc are like, well, he can't get shot tonight because he's not even supposed to die for another, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. But Biff makes the point of like, if you get shot with this small gun, you won't die for like 4 or 5 days. It'll slowly kill you. And that's...
Oh, God.
Yeah. This made me think of that. Anyway, that's my Back to the Future reference for this episode. I'll let that go.
Okay. I did want to talk about, like, I did think that Fiona seemed very like, you know, when she was questioning like the police or like, do we think that they did a good enough job? She was also saying like, let's just point out like they've been really helpful for me in my investigation, and they seem to be very on top of it, and like they're evading certain questions, but is that like normal and whatever. I felt like there was a very balanced argument of like, hey, I'm asking the questions, but I just want to put it out there. From my opinion, this has happened, but I understand like people are asking, why didn't they look into this person or that person? I felt like that was done quite well. I also thought, I thought in general she was quite respectful of everyone. I did think she was like, people keep asking me, and you know, we said this in episode 1, like I have to ask Veronica if she was involved.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have to. The more the podcast was going on, I was like, do you though? Like nothing is pointing to her. Like nothing.
No.
And like,
no,
and I know you like when we were discussing this, like, because Fiona Walker mentioned it in episode 1, we were discussing it in our preview. We were like, well, maybe it's a Deadly Mirage situation. But the thing is, in Deadly Mirage is there was evidence to point to it.
Right. Right.
But there's nothing here. No, it's not here. So it's...
If anything, the thing that she should have been questioned more, I think, is the police. Because that gets raised of, were the police maybe in on this somehow? Was it the person who did this maybe someone that the police were protecting? What, like, there's just... It seems so illogical that there's so many police working on this, and the numbers they throw out of the number of people that were interviewed over the years. I mean, it's what, tens of thousands of people.
I wanted to come back to you on this because you mentioned in episode 1, you posed a question and I think I like dismissed it a little bit. You kind of mentioned, why are there so many police on this?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Why are there so many? And I was a little bit like, well, blah, blah, blah. And the more the podcast went on, I was like, this is a lot of work. And not only that, so first of all, I will say, like, why are there so many police on at this stage? They were flown over. A group of them were flown over to Canada at one stage to investigate. Oh, what was his name? Martin something. The guy, the owner of the Havelock, or the previous owner of the Havelock in Nova Scotia in Scotland. They were sent over, and it was noted that they spent $9,000 to get them over there for a week. But they were like, he's not a suspect, and I'm like, what's happening here?
Yeah, this is the most expensive investigation that takes 20 years and goes nowhere. Also, a quick side note, Havelock from our time machine didn't realize that was going to be so pivotal to this. We talk all about the Havelock as though we knew it was going to be pivotal in this story.
I know. It's like we were throwing it in there on purpose as like... when I listened to it, I was like, oh my God, Jeff, Havelock's actually pivotal. Like, it actually is so important. What is this? Like, there's a full freaking episode on it.
I mean, I like to think that I just did good research.
Well, what's so funny is because when you said that, I was like, oh, that's where she ran over for the towels.
You did say that. You were correct.
So
yes,
I was correct, but jeepers.
I want to talk about a couple of things that I learned about crime and true crime from this podcast. Maybe you knew these things. Did you know what an EFIT was?
I don't think I've ever heard it described like that, but as soon as they said it, I was like, I can picture what it is.
What do you think it is?
Like a scribbly picture, you know, when they do the sketches. Scribbly picture.
Yeah.
A scribbly picture, Jeff. It's a sketch.
I don't know why they don't just call it scribbly picture, but it is an acronym, EFIT. I looked it up because she kept saying it and she never defined. Like when you use an acronym, but you don't ever say what it is and you just presume everyone knows what it is. I think that was a little bit annoying to me. But what do you think EFIT stands for?
EFIT. Oh my God, I freaking love an acronym. I is interest.
Nope.
Oh.
What do you think the F is?
I don't know what any of them might be.
It's
evolved. Go on.
Electronic.
Okay. Yeah. That makes
facial.
sense.
Identification. Technology.
So it's not someone just scribbling a picture.
No, it's an electronic Basically, it's inputting a bunch of descriptions to output a picture that is supposed to be a representation. So it's the modern technological version.
All the scribblers have no job anymore. That's sad. You don't get like crime dramas. There's like someone going, skin your face.
That was one thing I learned. Another thing I learned was we hear in episode 2 about how much it costs to get a hit on someone.
15 grand.
Yeah, 15
grand. That seems real cheap.
Real cheap.
Do you reckon that like would be increased for the Bay Area? Not that I'm looking for someone, but like, do you reckon they increase it, like depending on like where you live?
What? So, okay, I want to talk about something a little bit more, I guess, serious in like a question or criticism of this podcast, possibly. So, one thing that kind of struck me as I listened to this was, so the story we heard in the first episode was about the murder and how it's been unsolved and how there's very little information. There's no motive. There's no clear suspect. There's no picture of a suspect. And other than questioning Veronica, who's not a suspect, the wife, we don't really know anything. And then over the course of the next several episodes, we get a lot of conjecture, including there's this guy, Peter, whose name isn't Peter, who says he knows someone. He knows the person who hired the hitman. We get a few people from the town who are doing a lot of speculating. We get some experts, which is interesting and helpful. It's a lot of wheel spinning, I think. And technically the original series ends with episode 6, where we're hearing about the police and kind of questioning the police's role. But then episode 7 comes back, and that came out, I think, a few months later after the original run of the show. And this is where Andrew Wilson, the son, who was 4 years old, came out and basically tried to get people to come forward who had any information. I actually thought that was incredibly powerful to hear Andrew, whose only memory of his father is when his father was lying on the front step having been shot. Like that's his image of his father, which is so heartbreaking and sad. And to hear him talking, I thought was very powerful. But then it just sort of ends, and we get this episode a couple of years later, The Pub, which is about the Havelock, the place across the street, and actually that's where we get more information about what happened on the night. That's where we hear about the people who were eating across the street, who came over to try to help, and that's where we get the most kind of, I think, visceral details of the shooting. But it still sort of just ends. Like there's just not a lot of story here.
Yeah, I agree. And it felt like it ended like, well, hopefully we'll be back with more. Like this might be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I agree. It feels weird because it's like, okay, I have an expert, I have this, I have that. And I totally agree with the episode 7 being hugely impactful and emotional. But other than that, like the first 6 episodes could probably have been 2.
Yeah. Well, and there's a line
like
in
hearing
episode
from
6.
Veronica.
Right.
Is huge.
There's the one other thing that little pet peeve of mine in episode 5 is about the impact on the town. And this is one of those episodes where they describe the town as perfect and everything's wonderful. Great golf courses, great, it's a seaside town, great place to go for ice cream. And that sort of mythologizing of this town bothers me. But then in episode 6, there's a line about how, I forget who it is who's talking, but someone kind of catches themselves, and Fiona draws attention to it, of saying that someone says how this is fascinating. And she's like, no, this is not fascinating. This is devastating, not fascinating. Because a man...
She doesn't say that.
No, someone else says that. Yeah, I'm saying she draws it. She echoes it. She echoes it.
Yeah.
And I feel like devastating, not fascinating, is sort of the thesis of this whole series. Of it's presented as something to be fascinating, as a mystery, an unsolved mystery, but it's really just this devastating story that is frustratingly has gone nowhere for 20 years.
Yeah, I have that quote written down as well. Like, it kind of makes you hate. Well, it makes me dislike myself for liking these, like being so intrigued by this kind of story in terms of seemingly very vanilla family, like who were just like living their life, like they're not involved in any shady stuff, and they are impacted by this such a like gruesome and horrendous ordeal that has impacted their entire lives. And it was one of those moments where I paused, and then like I pressed pause on the podcast, I went back like a couple of minutes and I re-listened, and I was like trying to get that in my head. I was like, it's so true. It's true for basically all murders, but there is something so banal about this entire situation. And I really think that comes to light when Andrew speaks, because, you know, the photograph that was used and how Andrew's actually like holding it, like
the photograph taken on the day of the shooting. That was heartbreaking.
And then also, like, what's your thoughts on, in terms of like, I don't want to speculate too much. Like, I know we're talking about the podcast in general, but like the idea that this all happened because of the decking on a pub.
That seems so thin to me. That seems so improbable. So
I just feel like there has to be more to that if the police went over for a week to Canada. Like, this isn't like Celtic Tiger era when they're going over, is it?
I don't know what that means.
Celtic Tiger is like, I think we've discussed it on this podcast before, Jeff. You just don't remember it.
I'm not listening most of the time you're talking.
So glad we're on the same page. Okay, the mid 1990s to the late 2000s, basically when Ireland was like, what is happening? This is amazing. We got loads of direct foreign investment. We had low taxes for a while. Everyone was living the life. People were buying loads of houses and shit, and then the arse fell out of it all. So it basically transformed Ireland from a poor country to one of the wealthiest in Western Europe, which is helpful.
Wait, why are we talking about this?
If it's Celtic era time, everyone was doing well. Like the English were doing well. The Scots were doing, like everyone around Europe is doing well. So like, did they just have money to give like $9,000 for police to go over to Scotland or to Canada? Yeah. It feels just like such a stretch. Like if they'd only surely go if there was something to go for. And what were they trying to go for?
It does also beg that question of just like, where's all the money coming from for these police investigations that seemingly go nowhere?
On the road to nowhere. I don't know.
What, in the end of the day, in the end of this episode, what do you think? Was this worth your time?
I hate this because I feel like I'm often on the fence with this. Episode 1, intriguing. Episode 7, episode 8, intriguing. Maybe 2 with Veronica. Like, there was a lot of fluff in here, and I know it's only like a couple of hours of my life, but like the story in itself, like hearing about Veronica and Alistair's family and them as like a couple and their love story and their family, that I found intriguing. I just feel like there was like some sort of overkill of trying to fill 6 episodes, and then it was like, oh shit, like actually the next 2 episodes are the episodes, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that it wasn't 5 or 6 or 10 hours long. That would have been frustrating. I feel like we say this a lot about these super short ones, that like, it wasn't that big of a time investment. It is an interesting, like, it's an interesting mystery. It's a bizarre case. I mean, we didn't talk here about this whole thing of the envelope, and we don't know anything about this envelope, and we don't, like, what was the point? Why would someone do this? Why, if they're there to kill him, why not just do it when he opens the door the first time? Like, none of this makes sense. And that's what the whole pull of this is. It just doesn't make any sense. But I was hoping by the end of this that it would make a little bit more sense. And it didn't. And I think I feel like I say this about these cold case ones, but it's frustrating the lack of resolution. And this one maybe more than some others, where like, it's one thing to have an unsolved case. It's another thing to have a case that you just don't understand why it happened in the first place. And that's like, the whole
says us from here. Can you only imagine like what it's like to be like his wife or his kids? I will say there's a review on Reddit that basically says Fiona Walker made a very good podcast that summarizes all the facts. Oh, that went very posh. That summarizes all the facts without indulging in the silliness or salaciousness of most true crime podcasts. It's made with the cooperation of the Wilson family, which is something you should be looking for in any piece of journalism about a real life tragedy. Do not disagree with that last point there.
Yeah.
Do
I
not
totally
disagree.
agree with that. Sure. Okay.
Someone responded to say, planning objections are public. Look up the council's planning permission, and there they are, easy to find, but overlooked by the police looking for a probable cause. That was that's a good point as well, because we hear that in in episode 8 that the police could have found out that was he was talking about it even before the objection went in. But then they say, we all know rows about fencing, driveways, private road maintenance and such like cause such strong feelings and retaliation. Why wasn't this investigated immediately? With the response from the original person that I read the review from saying, I can't think of any that involve a hitman. That's all they say.
I think there's truth on both sides there. And yeah, I mean, it is true that these things like this, petty things, do sometimes spin out of control. So I guess it's not so far-fetched. I think Fiona actually nicely draws attention to the fact that, and that's in that episode 8 of, that seems extreme, but also stranger things have happened. But the point about the police too, I mean, I feel like the point the police kept making was we can't tell you all the things we know because we have to protect our investigation. We can't give you all the things that we're going to eventually question the suspect on. Mm-hmm. But they also had a suspect in 2022 or 2023 that didn't go anywhere. So I don't know. Hopefully there'll be an update on this case sometime. If these police keep working on it, maybe they'll get somewhere.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Also, I'm just aware that I have Googled cost of a hitman in the Bay Area. So if that comes up ever in my life, I just want to put it out there. It's not incognito or in DuckDuckGo. It's just there my Google browser.
D. All right. Noted.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a comment. Or if you disagreed with us, we love an argument. In fact, it's my favorite thing. Leave a comment, leave some questions. Tell us what you thought about this podcast. And don't forget to rate us while you're there. 5 stars all the way on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And, the only way we get out there is by you telling people. Go tell your friends. Thank you. Next time we're going to dive into the story of a con man who just couldn't stop lying. This is a tale of murder, stolen identities, fine art, a diaper, or nappy for the Irish folk, stuffed with gold bars, and a crime solved by a Rolex watch. We are previewing Sea of Lives from Uncover. That's on the next So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of MimeGov Media. The executive producer is Paxton Calariso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show in your podcast app. Don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.